So today, we're going to dive into a pretty controversial article. It's from a blog called The Appalachian Gorilla, and the title is Why Women Hate Their Sons. Now, our goal here isn't to judge it, but just to understand it. We're going to break down the author's arguments piece by piece to really see how he builds his case.
Right from the jump, the article hits you with this line. The whole red pill thing is a really central metaphor here. It's all about this idea of swallowing a difficult, painful truth, one that completely changes how you see the world.
And he doesn't stop there. He builds on this painful truth idea with another analogy, what he calls the jungle floor. He kind of paints this picture of himself, being pinned to the ground, forced to see all the rot and decay of society up close. Meanwhile, he says, everyone else is just blissfully unaware up in the treetops, completely ignoring the reality below. This metaphor is really key to understanding how he sees himself, as a guy who's alone in seeing the truth. So, this whole framework, this mindset, it all leads to the one big question that really drives the entire article. And this is it. This is the question at the very heart of his argument. He's basically setting up what he sees as a huge contradiction. If mothers really love their sons, then why, in his view, would they support things he believes will actually hurt their futures? This is the puzzle he's trying to solve. And his answer, well, it's about as blunt as it gets. After going through all the other possibilities, he lands on what he says is the only logical explanation, that women fundamentally hate their sons. I mean, that's it. That's the core thesis of the whole piece. Okay, so how do you even begin to support a claim that huge? Well, the author starts by going way back, looking at history. He basically argues that our modern kind of idealized version of motherhood is a pretty new invention, and that for most of human history, things were very, very different. And with this quote, he's taking direct aim at something most of us just take for granted. He's essentially saying that this whole idea of a mother's unconditional love is a lie, something pushed on us by media like Disney that hides a much harsher truth. So to back this up, he lays out this timeline. His whole point here is that if you look across history, taking young boys away from their mothers was totally normal, maybe even expected. He points to things like the Spartan agoge and even just pre-modern apprenticeships to argue that societies used to believe it was vital to get boys away from their mother's influence. All right, so let's shift gears a bit. The next part of his argument leaves history behind and jumps into modern psychology. This is where he develops a theory for why he thinks this hatred exists today, and it's all based on this one concept he calls hypergamy. So, what is hypergamy? Well, according to the author, it's this primal female instinct to always be looking for a higher status partner, to constantly try and move up the social ladder. He argues this evolutionary drive doesn't just switch off once a woman has a partner, and he says it's the real root cause of resentment in modern relationships. So from this idea of hypergamy, the author lays out what he calls a chain of resentment. It's like a domino effect. First, he says a woman feels trapped with a guy she doesn't think is her best option anymore. Then, the kids, they start to feel like a roadblock, something preventing her from finding someone better or getting ahead in her career. And finally, all of this builds into this deep resentment that he claims gets aimed specifically at her sons, because they're a constant reminder of the father. Okay, so we've got the history, we've got the psychology, but he doesn't stop there. He brings in several other really specific claims to try and nail his thesis down. And honestly, these are some of the most controversial points in the whole article. So first up, he makes this really incredible claim about sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. He completely throws out the medical consensus. He claims that SIDS isn't a real thing at all, but was actually made up by doctors as a cover story to hide what he says is the real truth, that mothers were killing their babies out of frustration. All right, next he goes to genetics to try and back up his point. The article makes this super specific claim that for every one male ancestor we have in our DNA, there are 16 female ancestors. And his reason for this huge difference? He ties it all back to the invention of agriculture, arguing that most men were basically enslaved and couldn't have kids, while women had children with a tiny elite of male slave owners. And for his last piece of evidence, he puts this number out there. The author claims that a big paternity test in Jamaica found that 50% of the kids weren't being raised by their biological dad. He then uses this one, single, uncited statistic to make this much bigger point, adding, and this is a direct quote, "The DNA results are not much better for the white folks." He offers this up as proof of what he sees as widespread female infidelity. So after all that, how does he bring it all home? In the end, he kind of turns the lens on himself, talking about his own reasons for writing something like this, positioning himself not as an attacker, but as someone just telling the truth. What he does is he lays out a bunch of disclaimers to sort of frame his intentions. He's very clear. This isn't about hating women. It's not because he got hurt by someone. It's not about hating his own mom. He even says he's a father to both sons and daughters, and that what he's writing is, in his words, just the reality of our world. And then he ends it all by looping right back to that first metaphor from the beginning. This final quote is pretty intense. It brings the whole thing full circle. He's saying his mission is to pin you, the reader, to that jungle floor, to force you to confront the same ugly truths that he believes he's discovered. So where does that leave us? What's the big takeaway here? The article, from start to finish, presents its most extreme ideas, not as just opinions, but as this hard-won truth learned through pain, which kind of leaves us with a bigger question to think about. What exactly is the role and the impact of these kinds of painful truth stories that we see online?